having women in wrestling media is so important, and it has been such an honor, a female podcaster myself, to see the amount of women have been involved in this community. And I have the honor tonight to chat with three fellow podcasters about women in media and what it means to us. I am Lo. I am the founder of Wrestling Winedown, which is a female founded and hosted podcast dedicated to wrestling and wine. I also have with me the ladies of those wrestling girls, Krista B and Miss Queen PR, as
Hi.
well as Iridian Fierro of the Wrestfriends podcast. How are you, ladies?
Hey.
We're good. Thank you for this is actually dope. I'm excited to be a part of this. When I saw the messages, people was like, do you want to do it? I'm like, hell yeah. Why not? Right? So I'm so happy to be a part of this and happy to be here.
Yes, thank you, Bell to Bells, for considering us to do this important conversation about women in media, specifically wrestling media.
It's actually a dope thing.
It really is. And I think that's a little bit of why we all started all of our brands, is because we didn't want wrestling media to just be a bunch of like old white guys.
That's a fact. Old white guys who sexualize women at every chance that they get, or stigmatize women's wrestling every chance that they get. So it's good that they have a voice that they can run to or lean towards or hear from or relate to, because we can relate to them as them being our representation in the ring and even outside the ring on social media. And so it's good that it's coming from us, like it's for us by us at this point.
So before we dive into talking about women in media, I want to talk about everyone's different platforms. So Iridian, you have the Wrestfriends podcast. Can you tell us why you started Wrestfriends and what the concept is?
Yeah, so Wrestfriends is just me and my cousin Teddy. We're two, primas from the south side of Chicago. And we really thought that we were missing something from the wrestling community. And we needed more women talking about wrestling. And we're like, well, we love wrestling. We're two girls. Like, why don't we talk about it? There's a platform there for us. And wrestling is something that we love and we've loved since we were little. And it's something near and dear to our heart. And it brings us happiness and joy. So we just really love that we get the chance to talk about it and give our opinions and really just be that voice for women and a safe space really for, any woman that wants to come and also talk about wrestling and not feel like, a little awkward if you're listening to a certain podcast. Because for me, like I would only listen to the men. I only knew men who had podcasts about wrestling. I never knew that there was a whole community of women who were also voicing their opinions and creators and podcasters. So I feel like when we started Wrestfriends, we're like, oh my God, we need to talk about wrestling and get more friends from this. And that's what we've become. And I'm so excited that now we are meeting more people who also do it because they love it and because they wanted to represent.
Queen and Krista, I know you guys started your podcast after you went to the Evolution pay-per-view. Can you tell us how that event inspired you to create your own platform?
Ooh, it was a lot to unpack. I have to go to the very beginning because I think me and P became inspired once one of us found out that the other likes wrestling. It was just like one of those things where I believe I said it. I was like, oh man, I'm missing wrestling for this. And he told a story, P's eyes look like a Christmas tree. Like, you watch wrestling? And I'm like, yeah, like I sure do. She's like, who's your favorite? And da 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 da. And we just connected from there. And then we was trying to figure out how are we gonna, like, we knew we wanted a platform to where we can talk about wrestling. And we knew that we wanted to talk about women's wrestling because
so Evolution was perfect
to
start with. Yeah. And the love, I think, at the pay-per-view and like the diversity of the crowd, I think is really what like made it, like we recorded like I think the next day. We were like, no, we gotta get this out. Like this is so exciting. Like what is next for wrestling? Like, because the women are now getting featured in such a way, like now this is exciting. Like they have their own Royal Rumble. Like I think just the representation of women being treated like the Stone Colds of our era to have their own pay-per-view was, I think, what really pushed Krista B and I to be like, no, we got to talk about this. And it has to be from Black girls' perspective, because we love wrestling too. And there's people out there that were like, I didn't know Black girls, like wrestling. And we're like, yeah.
So I started my platform with one of my friends that I had went to college with, and it's kind of same situation as you guys. She was on Twitter one day. I don't know if I had tweeted or she had tweeted something about WWE, and we kind of just connected there. We were friends before them, but we got to a different level of friendship once I found out that we had that in common. And we just decided, hey, let's just do a podcast. And I knew I wanted something more than wrestling to it. I knew I wanted something else involved. And my friend at the time, she liked beer. I was like, oh, I'm not a big beer drinker. I was like, what about wine? And she was like, oh, wine would work. And then randomly I saw the name, and we kind of just went from there. We started marketing in November of that year to come out in March. We're both in journalism and PR. So it was very important for us to have that plan put together of what our logo looked like, our music, our photos, etc. And from there, it just bloomed into Wrestling Winedown. She stepped away. She moved to Seattle, and she's doing her own thing. She has her own podcast now that helps other podcasters. But I have taken on Wrestling Winedown proudly, and I look forward to the future of it. I mean, now Wrestling Winedown is truly just me. And it's exciting to see the different women that are involved in the community, as well as the men that aren't rude, that want to listen to what women have to say, are excited to hear another episode of your podcast. And I'm sure you guys feel the same way. You have all of these people that are dedicated to listening to you because what you bring to the table. And it's almost just like an added bonus for them that you are an independent woman who has their own opinions about wrestling and that is knowledgeable.
Yeah, it's a real surreal moment too. Like me and P, we would figure like how people feel about us is how we would feel about the superstars, and they were like, "Oh my God, you're those wrestling girls," and we'd be like, "Are you talking to us? Like we're just regular people, like from New York. We're from the Bronx and Brooklyn. Like we don't really feed like we're not superstars. We don't have those big heads. Like yes, bow down to us." But it's also a rewarding thing to know that people are actually listening to what the words that you're saying. People can actually relate to how you feel, whether it's somebody relating to me about how I feel about Charlotte, that WrestleMania where she was the triple threat, or somebody relating to P on how she feels about Charlotte entering that triple threat at WrestleMania. It was two different opinions, but we had people on both sides like, yeah, I agree with you, but no, I agree with you too. And you guys are so relatable. So it's such a rewarding feeling to know that we actually have people who listen to us, who give their opinions, who let us know, who gives us feedback. It's a good thing to have. The feedback is the most important part for me.
I love that everyone on this panel is like a woman of color too, because we're like holding space like for ourselves, and that is like so important. And like relatability, like being authentic. I remember talking to you and Teddy and just being like, okay, like how much of ourselves do we really want to show? And like, especially when you work professionally in a white space, you're so used to like kind of putting, code switching a little bit. And then for the podcast, it's like, no, we're going to be ourselves. We're going to be authentic. We're girls from the Bronx in New York, and we curse and we say this, and these are the words that we use. And we love when people are like, that's why we listen. We're like, okay, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. And other Black girls can join the community, and a lot of people have started podcasts because they've seen like Wrestling Winedown, Wrestfriends, and like us do our thing, and they're like, oh, okay, like I can do this.
Right.
Iridian, I know you mentioned that when you started researching, even doing a podcast, you saw a lot of men in the field, men talking about wrestling. So seeing as the platform was mainly men, why did you make the decision to start your own platform? Were you intimidated that it was mostly men, or were you confident, you and Teddy, in knowing that, you know what, we're women, we can do this? I know you have a background in radio, so you had a certain skill set that you could bring to the table, from the get-go.
I do think that I was like a little scared initially when we were making our podcast, but I don't think it was because of the men. I think that I was scared just because like, oh my God, like, are we going to be able to pull it off? Like, it's just us. Like, what are we going to do? What do we know about, making a brand and really like marketing ourselves? Like, I just know audio. Like, I don't know how to do the rest of this stuff. But I did have a podcast before Wrestfriends because I started it in college, and it was just me, and I interviewed like two wrestlers, and I was like, oh my God, I'm making it. This is me. But it was just so crazy because when you start, and there are so many podcasts that are made by men, there were a lot of supportive men who had podcasts, and they were reaching out to Wrestfriends and saying, hey guys, like, we like what you do. Like, this is really cool. Like, keep going. Like, we don't know of a lot of women who are working, being in the industry for wrestling and advocating for wrestling. And it's important to give women an opportunity to have a space to talk about women, in the wrestling community, and females in wrestling, because there was just men saying like, oh yeah, did you even watch that match? Because it was just the women, it was my bathroom break. And I'm like, no, that's the only reason I was watching, because the girls were on, like, they were putting on a show. I don't know what you guys were doing. But it was crazy to start because it was just a little bit scary, because I didn't think that we were going to be able to pull it off. And now, like 2 years into it, I still feel like, oh my God, am I still doing this? It's a little crazy, but people have been very supportive, and I was very surprised by how supportive people were. And from that, we got to meet a lot of great people like you guys. Like, it's still surprising to me that like we are all in this and we're still doing it.
Yeah.
Christy, Jesus Christ, I'm losing my mind today.
It happens, girl. It happens.
Krista, PR, was there any hesitancy from you? You mentioned that you recorded an episode the next day, so you were confident that you could do it. But when you got to the point where you were about to release the episode, was there any hesitancy? Were you worried? What emotions did you have before you dropped your first episode?
I think the only hesitancy came from our actual name, because P didn't like our name. She's like, no, I don't like those wrestling girls. Like, can we think of something else? I'm just like, girl, they're going to talk about us whether it's good or it's bad. But then, like, when they came out, it was just like, okay, are you sure you want to do it with that name? Yes, like, let's just go. Let's just do it. Let's just edit it. Let's just publish it. Let's do it. And the next thing you know, it literally caught like wildfire. So it wasn't us being hesitant to release the episode, because we talked about it, and we was just like, even if nobody, or even if we have like 5 subscribers, we're still going to be in the space to say what we want to say how we feel, to release that energy. You can't.
And then
what happened?
No, go ahead.
I was like, and we took it as we're just going to be 2 friends venting about wrestling. Instead of like on the phone, we're going to let everybody hear our conversation.
Yeah. And it kind of started a little bit, I think there was no intimidation, because it also kind of started a little bit out of spite. Because I don't know if you remember this, Krista, but before we started the podcast, we had joined like those like weird big accounts that have like 10K followers that just post random wrestling content. They were looking for people to join their team to like live tweet and just post literally anything wrestling related. Very long story short, we're like the very few women, let alone Black women in this. And then we had like a massive group chat, whatever. And they would post the most like sexist things like on their page. And we had just got into wrestling Twitter, so we didn't really know like what the deal was.
We didn't know how toxic it was.
Right. So, but now I'm not surprised. So like I would say things like, okay, like, are we really going to cover Charlotte's boobs? She just had a 5-star match, but we're talking about her boobs, those kind of conversations. So they blocked us from the group and all that kind of stuff. So then we were like, we're going to fucking start this podcast.
Yeah.
I know I just run it back, Chris. I don't even know if you remember that.
I remember that because I remember coming onto Twitter and seeing how people were like going after you on our Those Wrestling Girls account. And I had to jump in like, what are y'all doing? Like, this is what we're not going to do. This is not what we stand for. and P is very vocal when it comes down to women empowerment and, you know, being fair and equality. But at the same time, she's the calm and I'm the storm. So it was like we had to make our voices known in both lights, in both tones, because you're not going to just walk over us, especially because it's not, the space isn't that big for us.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Especially
had
at
to
that time, this was like 2017.
right.
Like, it
We
was
had
so
to make
soon.
it known that we were here and you're not going to sit here and we're not going to be in a group where you're just constantly degrading women. And then on top of that, not only, you know, white women or like, you're also degrading women of color. Like, this affects all of us as a whole. And we're going to sit here and talk about boobs and puppies and Charlotte should have wore this and Becky should have wore that and this one should show more skin. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's not what we're doing.
What does wrestling media mean to you? I know that's a loaded question, but there's so many different types of wrestling media. You have podcasts, you have newsletters, you have websites, you have videos, YouTube. You have so much media to consume. But Iridium, what does wrestling media mean to you?
Oh man, there's so much that comes with wrestling media. Like, I think that it definitely is important to have wrestling media. And I think there are some fantastic resources out there and people really putting in the work and, you know, really representing well. And I know there's others who aren't the best, but I feel like we should really be giving our attention to those that really try and put their work in and, you know, are very fair. And us in wrestling media, I think that, you know, the four of us, like, you know, we really try to put in not only like our opinions, but also talk about facts. Because I feel like there's a lot of people who just go out there and just simply say, and we know that that has gotten a lot of wrestling media people in trouble because they really push their opinions and not the facts. So I think, if anything, if you are part of the good wrestling media and you're reliable, like, thank you. Thank you so much for, you know, because there's a code when you are in media that, you know, ethics, and you have to be ethical when you really do these things. So you have to be a good resource. And if you're not a good resource, then you should really think about how you're doing things and how you continue to do things. But I think it could be a great thing. And I'm glad to be a part of it. And I'm glad to be a part of the good side.
Kristen, PR, I know you guys work in entertainment media. So, what does the wrestling media mean to you?
I, if you don't mind me answering first, because I've had to actually dig deep and answer this question for myself because I work at a tabloid and they gave me the opportunity to write about wrestling. But I have to write for that audience. And what those wrestling girls stand for is the complete opposite of that audience. And that's all I'm going to say about that. I think everybody can put everything together. So I'm given, you know, my dream opportunity to write about wrestling for like a major publication. And I had to take a moment and be like, this is not what I want to cover. And I think that's what I had to truly answer for myself. Like, what is wrestling media? Like, what do I want to say in this space? Because the four of us having this platform is like also, you know, we kind of have a responsibility in a way of like, how are we going to use this platform? Because people do care about what we're saying. So I think for me, just being able to, and I do it on our show, is always talk about the value in a female in wrestling. So like, even if they're not a Sasha Banks level wrestler, like I always like to see like, okay, but what else do they bring to the table? Like, being a former professional dancer doesn't hinder you as a wrestler. Like, how does that actually enhance, like, that sort of thing? So just being a platform that always advocates for women, I think is important for me when it comes to wrestling media, but also just being fortunate enough to have a platform, I think the most important thing for me.
I think for me, I was very fortunate enough to work for a company where one of the main jocks is a huge wrestling fan, but also works for WWE. So, and not only that, but my supervisor and my coworkers are also WWE fans. So I was very fortunate enough to pitch an idea when it came down to women in wrestling and how they are portrayed in wrestling, the women of color particularly. Um, and I was able to tell their story, although like the company I work for is mostly hip hop music, if you know, so to bring something different, it was a risk, but it was a risk I was willing to take to have our voices heard, to have, just because this wrestler is pretty doesn't mean that she can't wrestle. Doesn't mean that, you know, it's back in the attitude era where they're just flaunting your assets. Like you have more to bring to the table. So for me to be able to shed light on that side of wrestling, it opened eyes. It gain helped gain other people's perspectives on what wrestling is really like now, instead of what they used to see. Like, although sometimes I feel like we're in a time warp when we watch certain shows and certain segments and stuff, we still see that these women are out here kicking ass. They're out here being bold and beautiful, and not only having to use their curves to get places, but they're actually using their talent, and they're making history while they're doing it. First ever women's Royal Rumble. Now we have the Queen of the Ring. We had women headline WrestleMania. We had Black women headline WrestleMania. We had a first women's Money in the Bank. We had a first women's Royal Rumble winner. And it's stories like that I can tell, or that we can tell in media, that helps push the envelope for women. Because I was pushing this button for a long time. In fact, like that's how I got my job working at where I'm working at, because I mentioned that I liked wrestling. I love to watch wrestling. I love watching the women wrestle. And one of my former supervisors at the time was like, "That's how you got your job. Like you came out different. You didn't come out generic and give us generic answers. You was real and transparent." And being able to push that through and being able to see, like, to push that envelope for other women to, be more attentive, or even fans to be more attentive to our rate. Like, although we're mostly a hip hop radio station or whatever, and we have a digital team, it's not always about hip hop radio and digital. Like the digital side is always, it's more broad than what you think it is. So I was very fortunate enough to put my twist on wrestling and media and bring it to somewhere where it's really male dominated.
So I think for me, wrestling media, kind of like Aradia said, so when you go to school for journalism, they teach you, like, you seek the truth and you report it. And I think that's extremely important in wrestling media. Unfortunately, I think the landscape that we're in now, with any media, I think people are very quick to put information out there and not fully research it, or, think about the impact that it could have on people. And even with something like wrestling media, sport, reporting about things that are important or people's personal life, like you have to really seek the truth and report it. You can't just go out there just because you have a scoop and share it with your whole audience and then kind of worry about the backfire after. You should worry about that before you put stuff on the internet. But unfortunately, people don't think like that. Um, two, I think it's important that, women and men have people that they can look up to in wrestling media that look like them. And, when you watch WWE, we'll get into this. When you watch WWE and you watch AEW, sometimes it can be a little bit unsettling to see people that don't look like you, on commentary, or, backstage interviewers, or if they do have someone that looks like you, they don't use them all the time. And for women in media, it can leave a sour taste in your mouth, because you wonder, well, they're not utilizing women that look like me or women at all. Like, do I have a safe spot in this field or in this community doing what I'm doing? So I think it's extremely important to just have people that look like you in the field. And I've said it for so long. I wish WWE would hire a Black woman as a backstage interviewer or on commentary. We've seen Beth Phoenix, we've seen Renee Paquette. They do great things, but I want to see a Black woman on commentary. I want to see a light skin, a dark skin Black woman. We can go all into colorism, but I think WWE really needs to focus on WWE and AEW needs to focus on the audience that they bring to the table and the demographics. You have Black women watching wrestling, you have Asian women, you have Mexican women. These women want to see people that look like them on the screen represented in a positive manner. I mentioned the female journalist. Who were some of the female journalists you all looked up to before beginning your podcast journey?
For me, so I was working for a publication or interning for a publication. I didn't decide that I really wanted to be a journalist until 2014 when I graduated my undergrad. And I was introduced to a woman named Ayanna Prescott, who literally is taking off right now in the Broadway scene. Like she's she produced a play that's now on Broadway. Like she's a freelancer, or not a freelancer, but she writes for Variety. She writes Broadway pieces. She has her own podcast, What's Up Broadway. And it was because of her. I know you said journalist, but I have to take it back. Maya Angelou was always an inspiration for me. When it came down to writing, I actually have one of her famous quotes sitting on my table over here. And then also I was able to, like, covering different events. I saw a lot of people who look like me. So Gia Peppers, she's entertainment, and I saw her at Essence Street Style Festival, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this woman, she looks amazing. Who is she? You know, and I found out like she's Gia Peppers. She also was at Hot 97 before I got there, of course. So she was definitely one of my inspirations. She's still one of my inspirations. She's out here killing it. Okay. And yeah, those are the three. Ayanna, Maya Angelou, and Gia Peppers was definitely like the three who helped me in the sense trying to figure out where I wanted to go. And especially because Gia and I are the same age. And she's like above and beyond right now. So it's really good to see somebody who's my age go out and kill it the way that she's killing it.
Sure, you want to go, Queen? You want
Sure. I honestly been watching their career, the two women that Krista mentioned, and it's funny because when it comes to podcasting at the time, all of my favorite podcasts were hosted by men, so I couldn't really like look up to anyone, like any women in that respect. And I love a lot of, I love any female-driven narrative. So I have a lot of female authors, and Oprah, of course. I loved Oprah. I guess Renee Young too, to a certain extent. I love how versatile she was. Like she could mix it up with the storyline. She tried her hand in commentary, and just the faith that they had in her, just to be able to kind of take everything and like run with it was really inspiring. And just being in the media field for like almost 10 years, I'm very inspired by like my peers, because watching them grow, and it just pushes you to want to be more, because you're seeing people that look like you in spaces that you want to be in, and it inspires you to want to push, to be there. Like my friend Marie David, she was at WBLS as well, and she's killing it now.
Well, she's still at WBLS.
She's still there, but she's everywhere. Like she's doing a lot of different things. But Wrestling Winedown, like I remember seeing you guys on social media, and I'm just like loving the marketing before you guys put out the show. Like I was just like, this is amazing, and it just it inspires you to want to, like, because we have to work harder as women of color, period. So seeing other, the hard work that like you ladies put in, it inspires me to like really be like, yeah, we're really out here doing this. And we're still doing it. It's crazy.
There is a woman here in Chicago, and she was a radio host for a very long time, and her name was Showbiz Shelley, and she knew everything pop culture related. And she would just get on the mic, and every week she would take callers, and people would challenge her in like celebrity trivia questions, and she always won. And in my head, I was like, oh, this was before you knew what like radio people looked like. Like when I was like 5 years old with my little boombox in my room, I would listen and I'm like, oh, I want to be just like her. And I had the privilege of meeting her when I got older. And I was like, you don't even know like what you did for me. Like crazy. I would have never even thought about a microphone if it wasn't for you. But when I got into wrestling, the first woman that I saw with a microphone was Lillian Garcia. And her just in the ring and her voice was so beautiful. I thought, oh my God, I can do that. I want to do that. She looks so cool. And I think that was also my initial thought when I first saw women wrestling. I was like, I didn't know we could do this. What? I want to do that. That looks awesome. And of course, my mom was like, no, you're not going to do that. But Lillian was just so huge. And I hope that one day I'll get to meet her because, oh my goodness, she also was very like inspirational. And to this day, I'm like, what is Lillian doing? Look at her with her podcast, living her best life, doing yoga on Instagram Live. Could never be me, but she's goals.
So for me, so I really like Body Beam. I listened to her podcast. Okay, now listen. She's not a wrestling fan, but she just has a certain swag about her. She's confident and she's just an honest black woman. And she's been media. She's popular on social media, but she remains authentic. And I really like that about her. Honestly, I've been inspired by just a lot of individuals in just found in life. I've been inspired by my grandma. I've been inspired by my mom. I've been inspired by my cousin DeAndre, who used to go to all the wrestling events with me. I take inspiration from places, no matter men or women. Paquette is another one that it was an absolute dream to just even have a conversation with her. I've met her before, but just to sit down and brain about her experience as a journalist, being WWE, um, going through that, career path of starting as a backstage interviewer to going to commentary to leaving and starting her own platform. It takes a lot of skills and a lot of hope to do something like that. So, when it comes to female journalists, I feel like there have been a few and far between for me growing up. But I'm glad to see now that we have more that we can look to, and the future generations have more to look to as well. Um, how do you guys feel about the current state of me as a whole? So, I just mentioned that growing up, we didn't have a lot of women, but now we're having a lot of women on our screens, on our podcasting apps, on YouTube. How does it feel now watching media while also doing media? We'll start with the
That's an interesting question. Watching everything evolve as you are on the ride. I think that right now, people say it all the time, but I think it's a great time to be a wrestling fan. And it's also a great time to be a creator of wrestling content. So I feel like there's more women now being represented than ever before, and more women of color every day get into wrestling. And now there are these spaces for, them to go and listen to women talk about wrestling, and not just wrestling, but women's wrestling. So I think right now we are good. We could be better, but I feel like every day, like there's more representation. And I think that we're on the right path. We got a little tweaks here and there, because we could always be better and we could always make changes. But I think that the amount of support that I see for women and the amount of support that we give each other right now, I think that's what's needed. And if we continue to do that, this field is just going to be filled with just amazing creators and amazing people. And we're all going to be at big pay-per-views together, all in one section, like clapping and cheering. And like, that's all I could hope for.
You want to go, P?
It's terrifying, to be honest with you, because I work for like a News Corp company, so being like in an extreme environment political views or views that you don't necessarily align with, and then catering to an audience that isn't you, is definitely, especially in the political climate, I think it's terrifying. And then that bleeds over into the wrestling world. You have like the speaking out movement and things like that that are happening on the wrestling side. So it's definitely terrifying because it's like you want to be informed, you want to have the journalistic ethics, but it's like you don't want to say the wrong thing. Like you want to be informative, you want to be factual. Then it's like, where do you find factual information these days? Like even in the wrestling world, it's like, did you just, I forgot what tweet went viral that just like wasn't true. Like someone just like wrote it and it went viral, and then all of a sudden it's a fact. And like, to me, that's terrifying because it's like, where's the real stuff? So I'm glad that like hearing like you two talk about going back to the being a journalist, because a lot of podcasters aren't journalists. So I love that you guys have those ethics and want to make sure that this landscape is ethical, because then that makes we can hold other people accountable for it. So I think I'm glad that we have these spaces.
For me, I feel like sometimes media can definitely be tiring and draining. Although it's becoming more of a space to where you can voice your opinion, you do have that right to speak out. They are honoring First Amendment freedom of speech more often than what it was before. It can definitely be tiring. It can definitely be toxic. It can definitely be, if you do not have your sources in order, or if you're writing something and you don't have your characters and your lead and this and that, it can be very stressful on you. And then it's also so rewarding to see media bleed into wrestling, because you have, like, although it was such a horrible thing that had happened, the fact that WWE, the way that they were honoring Kobe and Gianna and everybody who passed away on that plane crash that year, and then also to see how Cardi B and Lacey Evans was going at it and how people were writing about it, and to see how Bianca Belair was with Megan Thee Stallion right before Megan Thee Stallion did Lollapalooza, or to see how the New Day took on the Injustices and took a knee in the middle of the ring and put a fist up. It's rewarding to see that, wrestling, although it's its own entity, is not alone. And you do have people who are aware of what's going on around them because of the media. And they want to bring it to that world to make other people aware who may not, who one, may not be aware, or two, are too ignorant to realize that this is really happening. It's like you have to break out of that bubble. So to have media, and then to have that media fall or bleed into wrestling media, it's a gift and a curse. It's a good and a bad thing.
I would say I am hopeful for the current state of media, specifically wrestling media. I think with platforms like the ones that we have, it makes me optimistic to see what's next. We've mentioned that, our different platforms could inspire, another woman to start their own podcast or a blog or something like that. And that's what makes me hopeful about it, is that the work that we've been putting in for however many years will pay off, because it will inspire someone else to listen, or it will inspire someone to start their own podcast. And, there are things in the wrestling media world that I wish would change, and I wish that, quite honestly, would just go away. But with the landscape of wrestling, that type of thing won't happen. So it's important that, these platforms that we do have that are ethical, that, are going to put out content with people that, people of color, marginalized individuals. It's just so important. And that's what we need to really focus on. And I'm so glad that we were able to have this discussion, for people of color on one platform, talking about the thing that we're passionate about, being women in wrestling media. So thank you guys so much. We'll just list off our different platforms to end the episode. So You can find Wrestling Winedown anywhere you listen to your podcast: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and we are on Twitter and Instagram at WWDCAST.
Same. You can find the Wrestfriends podcast anywhere that you stream your favorite podcasts. That's Spotify, iTunes, iHeart, everywhere. And you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Wrestfriends. That's the word wrestling and friends together, Wrestfriends. And you can also find our merch at What a Maneuver. And make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, also Wrestfriends.
Okay, so for us, you can definitely follow us everywhere. At the aforementioned statement, everywhere podcasts are found. You can definitely subscribe to our YouTube, subscribe to our Patreon, because we definitely have a lot of good content that will be coming out on our Patreon. Follow us on Twitter at T Wrestling Girls, Instagram and Facebook, Those Wrestling Girls. Please join our discussion group. Leave everything you want to talk about in the group, and we would definitely respond and get back to you.